July 1945, British scientists uncovered something that shouldn't have existed. A sleek, silver rocket, faster than sound, guided by itself, and powerful enough to touch space. The German V-2. When American engineers examined it, they realized the terrifying truth. They weren't just looking at a new weapon, they were staring at the future. A future that would soon leave Earth behind. July 18, 1945, Farnborough Airfield, England. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but puddles still glimmered like oil stains beneath the floodlights. Beneath the cavernous hangar roof, the air smelled of metal, oil, and something else, something alien. A line of British guards stood stiffly at the perimeter, rifles slung, eyes fixed on the strange machine that lay before them. It was 28 feet long, sleek as a bullet, its silver-gray skin streaked with soot. Near its nose cone, faint scorch marks curled across the metal where heat had bitten deep. A small stenciled insignia, V-2, was barely visible through the grime. Dr. Robert Goddard Jr., one of the American scientists flown in from White Sands, stepped closer and let his gloved hand rest on the side of the rocket. It was warm to the touch, as if it still remembered its flight. Around him, British technicians murmured in low voices, unloading crates of tools and camera equipment. Someone muttered that this was one of the Peenemünde rockets, as if the name alone carried the weight of terror. Goddard's superior, Colonel John Stanford of the U.S. Army Ordnance Department, broke the silence. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice echoing off the steel rafters, "you're looking at the future of warfare, and God help us, maybe the future of everything." They circled the rocket slowly. A British engineer knelt by the exhaust bell, tapping the rim with a wrench. The metal rang sharp and clear, not like any conventional bomb casing. The rocket's fins were seamless, welded with eerie precision. Its shape was unlike anything produced in Allied factories, more aircraft than artillery shell. Under the harsh lights, Goddard squinted at the engine assembly. Twin turbopumps, massive propellant lines, an intricate maze of valves and regulators. He scribbled furiously into his notebook, knotting words like bipropellant, pressurized tanks, stabilization fins. He turned to one of the British officers. "How far did it travel?" The officer exhaled a long breath. From the Dutch coast to London, nearly 200 miles, came in faster than sound, no warning, just the impact. Silence settled again. They'd all heard the reports during the war, strange explosions that gave no siren, no engine noise, only a sudden flash and collapse of buildings. But seeing the thing itself, it was different. It felt like they were looking at a weapon from another century. "Wernher von Braun," said Stanford quietly, almost to himself. "That's the name behind this, said to be running the program out of Peenemünde before it was bombed." He looked at Goddard. "You ever think they'd actually pull it off?" Goddard shook his head. "We were still testing prototypes barely 20 feet high. This," he gestured at the V-2's massive frame, its curved guidance fins, its polished combustion chamber. "This thing could touch space." A camera flashed. The sound startled everyone. The technicians were documenting everything, every bolt, every panel, every piece of writing. One soldier carefully pried open a hatch near the midsection, revealing a maze of copper wires and spinning gyroscopes suspended in gimbals. Goddard leaned closer. "Guidance system," he whispered, "completely self-contained, no remote control, it flew itself." That realization hit the room like a bomb. Every American and British engineer in that hangar understood what it meant. The Germans hadn't just built a new weapon. They had built a machine that thought for itself, adjusted its path through the air, corrected its aim, and struck its target without a human touch. Stanford rubbed the back of his neck. "We are years behind this," he muttered. "Years." The hangar's doors rattled as a gust of wind rolled through. Outside, a transport truck idled, waiting to haul the rocket's disassembled parts to the docks. The Allies were shipping these machines and their creators across the Atlantic. The United States wanted every scrap of knowledge that came with them. Goddard looked back one last time as the floodlights dimmed. He could almost hear the roar of the V-2's engine, feel the tremor of the Earth as it launched skyward, a machine born of war, pointing the way towards something far greater and far more dangerous. As the hangar doors closed, the future of human flight disappeared into shadow. August 1945, Peenemünde, Baltic coast, Germany. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and sea salt. The once secret rocket base of Peenemünde lay in ruins, a ghost town of broken concrete and twisted steel. Bomb craters filled with stagnant rainwater, and the skeletal remains of launch gantries jutted toward the gray sky like the bones of some dead machine. A convoy of American military trucks crawled down the cracked road, carrying a mix of U.S. Army engineers, intelligence officers, and civilian scientists. Their orders were simple: retrieve everything the Germans had left behind. Dr. Robert Goddard Jr. climbed out of the lead truck, clutching a leather-bound notebook. He could hear gulls crying over the Baltic surf, and faintly, the hiss of wind through shattered windows. Ahead of him, a sign lay half-buried in the sand: "Hier ist Versuchsanstalt Peenemünde, Army Research Center Peenemünde." Colonel Stanford joined him, scanning the wreckage through binoculars. "The RAF really gave it to them," he said quietly, "but not before they launched thousands of those things." Goddard nodded, his eyes tracing a line of collapsed concrete bunkers. "Thousands built here, tested here. Somewhere in these ruins are the drawings, the prototypes, the men who built them." They entered what had once been the test control building. The walls were scorched, the glass shattered, but papers still littered the floor: equations, fuel diagrams, half-burned blueprints labeled Aggregate 4, the V-2's official name. One of the American engineers bent down and brushed ash off a drafting board. The lines were sharp and clean, a cross-section of the rocket's combustion chamber. "They were burning alcohol and liquid oxygen," he murmured. "Same principles as our tests, but scaled up 10 times. A British intelligence officer handed Stanford a folder recovered from a metal cabinet. Inside were photographs, grainy black-and-white images of rockets lifting off against a twilight sky. The plumes were vast, pure white columns of fire. Beneath each image was a test number, a date, and a single signature at the bottom: Dr. Wernher von Braun. Goddard stared at the name. "That's him." Stanford frowned. "You sound like you know him." "I've read his work," Goddard said. "Before the war, he studied my patents, even wrote letters asking about liquid fuel efficiency. I never imagined he'd do this with it." The team moved deeper into the facility. They found the test stands, massive steel scaffolds pitted with blast marks, and a cavernous underground assembly room where unfinished rockets still lay on their sides, waiting for launch. The sheer scale of it left everyone silent. One of the young U.S. engineers whistled. "We've got nothing like this back home, not even close." Stanford's reply was grim: "We will." By the next morning, the Americans had filled several trucks with what remained: guidance gyros, engine turbines, blueprints, and thousands of pages of handwritten notes. Each crate was labeled "Property of the U.S. War Department." But the most valuable prize wasn't paper or metal. It was the men themselves, the scientists who'd built the V-2. Word came through that a group of them, including von Braun, had surrendered in southern Germany. They were being held under heavy guard. Orders were already in motion: Operation Paperclip. As the convoy rolled away from Peenemünde, Goddard looked out the window at the empty launch pads fading into the mist. He imagined the roar of engines, the fire lighting up the night sky, the first human-made object breaking free of Earth's atmosphere. And he wondered, if mankind could build this during war, what could it build in peace? September 20th, 1945, Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Bavaria. The war was over, but the hunt for mines had just begun. In a secluded alpine lodge commandeered by the U.S. Army, a group of German scientists sat at a long oak table, their faces pale and tired. Among them was a tall man with a high forehead and sharp blue eyes, Dr. Wernher von Braun. Across from him, Colonel John Stanford adjusted his gloves, his expression caught between admiration and distrust. Behind him, 2 American guards stood by the door, Thompsons slung low. Von Braun broke the silence first, his English precise and calm. "You are not here to arrest us," he said, "or we would already be in handcuffs." Stanford didn't flinch. "You built weapons that killed thousands in London. I should have you in shackles." Von Braun's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "And yet, here we are, because you want to build what we built, only faster." The room was thick with tension. Goddard, standing near the wall, studied von Braun carefully. He was younger than he expected, not a monster, but a visionary who had walked too close to fire. Stanford opened a folder and laid out a series of documents stamped top secret. "Operation Paperclip," he said. "The United States government is offering you and your team a choice: work for us or face Soviet custody. You know which one you'll prefer." Von Braun exchanged glances with his colleagues, Dornberger, Riedel, and the others. They all knew what the Soviets would do. He finally nodded. "Very well, we will cooperate, but you must understand, I have no desire to build weapons anymore. My dream is space." Stanford arched an eyebrow. "Space?" "Yes," von Braun said softly. "The V-2 was just a beginning, a crude step toward something far greater, reaching orbit, perhaps even the moon. War forced us to aim downward, not upward." For a moment, the room went silent. Even the guards hesitated. Goddard felt a strange shiver. He had dreamed the same dream once, long before the world went mad. Later that week, the Germans were transporting under heavy escort to France, then by ship to New York. The papers called it scientific relocation. The truth was less noble. America was racing the Soviets to capture the brains behind Hitler's rocket program. In Washington, officials debated morality versus necessity. But at White Sands, New Mexico, far from politics, preparations were already underway to test the first American-assembled V-2s. As the scientists disembarked from a C-47 on American soil, von Braun paused, staring out at the endless desert stretching to the horizon. The sun burned low, turning the sand gold. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a battlefield. He was looking at a launch pad. Goddard approached him. "You understand," he said quietly, "people will never forget what these rockets were built for." Von Braun nodded, his face unreadable. "Then we must show them what else they can do." He looked up at the sky, a vast, brilliant blue without smoke or searchlights, and whispered something under his breath in German. Goddard didn't catch the words, but he understood the meaning. The age of war rockets had ended. The age of space rockets had begun. May 10, 1946, White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. The desert shimmered beneath the morning sun. 1,000 miles of sand and scrub stretched toward distant mountains, the air trembling with heat and silence. In the center of it all stood something that did not belong, a steel tower rising over a long, silver rocket. The V-2 had returned to life. American engineers moved in a blur of khaki and sweat, tightening fuel lines, checking telemetry cables, securing the launch clamps. The German scientists watched from a fenced-off area nearby, their uniforms replaced by plain overalls and name tags. Above them, the stars and stripes fluttered in the wind. Dr. Werner von Braun stood beside Dr. Robert Goddard Jr., both wearing protective goggles. They spoke little. The tension in the air was electric, part excitement, part fear. At 08:30 hours, the range commander's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Begin countdown, T-minus 60 seconds. Engines whined, pumps screamed to life. Liquid oxygen hissed through metal veins, the air filled with the smell of ethanol and frost. Goddard gripped the railing of the observation deck, his pulse racing. He'd dreamed of this moment since childhood, humanity's first true step into the high frontier, yet it was born from the wreckage of war. 10 seconds. Von Braun's eyes locked on the rocket. He whispered something, not to the crew, not to the Americans, but to the machine itself, perhaps a prayer. 3, 2, 1, ignition. A blinding flame erupted beneath the rocket, white-hot and alive. The ground shook. Sand blew outward in concentric rings. Slowly, impossibly, the steel body began to rise straight, steady, graceful. Cheers erupted across the control bunker. Some of the American technicians whooped and clapped, others just stared, mouths open. Even the stoic military officers couldn't hide their awe. The V-2 climbed higher, trailing a plume that stretched for miles. Its roar echoed across the desert floor, bouncing off canyon walls. For 60 seconds, it was the loudest sound on Earth. Then silence. The rocket vanished into the upper sky, 100,000 feet, then 200,000. For the first time, a human-made object touched the edge of space. The scientists tracked its path on radar until the blip vanished. Minutes later, a distant boom rolled across the desert, the warhead casing shattering harmlessly on impact miles away. Goddard lowered his binoculars. His throat was dry, his heart pounding. Around him, the Americans celebrated, shaking hands, slapping backs. But von Braun remained motionless, his eyes still fixed on the sky. Stanford approached from behind. "Hell of a show," he said, lighting a cigarette. "You think it's worth all the effort?" Von Braun didn't look away. "It's not a show, Colonel. It's the beginning of a road, one that doesn't end on this planet." Stanford exhaled smoke through his nose. "Just make sure that road doesn't lead back to Berlin." As the sun dipped lower, the team began loading the next test vehicle. They would fire dozens of them that year, some for weapons data, others for upper atmosphere research. The military saw range, payload, precision, but the scientists saw something more: altitude, orbit, possibility. That night, Goddard stood outside his quarters, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, above the thin veil of Earth's sky, was the future these rockets pointed toward. He knew that one day, humanity would ride machines like this not to destroy cities, but to explore worlds. But for now, all they could do was light the fuse and learn from the fire.